Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the GBSN Cross-Border Coffee Break titled Transforming Business Education. Just really quickly before we start, all of you as participants will be muted throughout the whole time of the webinar. You can, however, submit a question anytime on Zoom without disrupting the presentation. And to do that, just simply click on the Q&A button on your toolbar and this little box will pop up. You can input your question, send anonymously or not, and click send. All questions will be put into a queue in which we'll get to at the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. So my name is Nicole Zephyrin, and I'm the Communications Officer at the Global Business School Network. I facilitate most of our webinars. Today we have Timothy Van Zant, who is the Professor of Economics at INSEAD. He is also the GBSN's main ambassador for the institution. We also have Ketal Agulvin. She is the Executive Director of the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society at INSEAD. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now I'll hand it over to Timothy and Ketal to begin their presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, if there are some people like us who are located in Europe. Good evening, if you're somewhere else. Tim and myself are delighted to be here today. I joined personally INSEAD last year to create and launch the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society. As the plotting around launching that institute started way before my arrival at INSEAD, I will first give the floor to Tim, my colleague, who can tell us how that all came about, give it that background before I share with you, exchange and try to learn from you how we can all transform business education for greater societal progress. So that's my introduction to Tim.
Okay, thanks, Ketal. So, you know, the title of this webinar was Transforming Business Education, but the complete title is about transforming business education to align business and society. And you know, first I'm going to just say why should businesses do this? I'll address that quickly, and why business schools. Why should business and society be aligned? Well, you know, one good answer is that it's the right thing to do. But another important answer is that if business is not aligned with society, there'll be increasing pressure from governmental and other social institutions that will make it harder and harder for businesses to thrive. And then business schools naturally have a mission to support businesses in this kind of thing. But again, it's also the right thing for us to do. And if we don't do it, we'll also be facing pressure from external institutions. Now that little bit about why would we even want to do this in the first place, that's actually, you know, fairly easy. A lot of consensus. That idea of that it matters what we're doing for society is something at INSEAD that's part of our DNA. When the school was founded in 1960, it's very explicitly in its mission was that they were trying to create a school in Europe that would bring together leaders from around Europe, improve European integration, and bring peace and prosperity. So already a societal mission there. And I think most business schools have also have a similar spirit. So this was not a controversial thing at INSEAD as this developed. And I think it, you know, goes back a long ways, and we've had many endeavors in this direction. Now, before talking about exactly, you know, what were the early steps that we took, I'd like to say, okay, it's easy enough to say, why would we want to align business and society? But to really do anything, you have to take a deep look, intellectual look at what does it mean to do that. And this is actually, you know, I'm going to give a very brief answer to this. And I think this is actually an interesting topic of research, you know, to get into the details. But you can't just say that's an interesting topic of research, because you need to have a first formulation of this before you can even define your mission, trying to figure out what you're trying to do. So alignment of business and society. The first very important thing to say is that it's not that business is naturally unaligned. It's not that business is naturally in opposition to society. Yes, you know, in business leaders are often just seeking material benefit, shareholder value, profit. However, when they're doing so, it's largely through trying to make things, provide services more efficiently at lower cost, identify things that people need, and essentially in order to appropriate value, they're creating value. And through markets, largely all of even very self-interested efforts of like this end up creating economic growth. They end up going towards the greater societal good. Now, frankly, if markets work perfectly, very hypothetical world, that would be the end of the story, and we wouldn't actually need this webinar today. And so that, the caveat, okay, but it doesn't quite work that way, is what we're trying to address. But the reason why I start out by saying, yeah, but there's already a lot of alignment is because, first of all, you need to understand that that's simply true. But you have to also understand that an awful lot of things that businesses and business schools are already doing is already aligned. We don't need to screw around with that. We don't need to, turn our thumbs down at that. We don't need to create opposition to that. And that's important if you're actually trying to get everybody, it's not just because it's true, but also to make sure that everybody who's involved at the school and businesses, whether they are worried about this caveat that we're going to address, or they're just doing other things that just naturally help society, that everybody feels like they're part of the project. And that's the only way to make it really effective. Okay, so what are the caveats that we need to address? Let me first give the economist. I'm an economist, so I'll first give the simple economist view on this. We have market failures such that pursuit of simple profit doesn't necessarily do good things. It can cause harm even. And we also know the markets don't lead to say anything about what the distribution will be like. There can be lots of inequity. So these are things to be addressed, and economists have focused on then, okay, what can governments do in order to achieve a realignment? So it's about government policy, regulation, regulating pollution, and so on. Also redistribution of income through tax systems and so on in order to do a realignment. Now, economists understand that that governments themselves have limitations. Okay. Now, if we simply took the economist's view, as far as I've described it here, we wouldn't really need this webinar either, because it would be up to the public policy schools, economics departments to sort out what government needs to do. Business just keeps doing its thing, trying to make money, and governments set up institutions to make sure that that pursuit of profit actually leads to a common good the best they can. Economists identified, though, that governments actually also face a lot of limitations in achieving that alignment. But they kind of stop there, throw up their hands and say, well, this is the best we can do. Okay, it's not perfect, it's the best we can do. But what we really understand, though, is that we can do way better than that when business leaders themselves take on a conscious role, a conscious understanding of their role in helping society. And then that can be much more effective than complex government regulation, which can't possibly achieve it. So that means that business leaders will be having a sense of responsibility, a sense of ethics. And that is where now the business schools have a crucial role in order to help business leaders understanding, okay, what do we need to be doing differently in order to achieve this alignment? One of the first, we've been doing many things in this sphere for a long time. But one of the first big things we did to kind of incorporate this into what we're doing at the school was develop a set of core courses in our last curriculum review, which actually outlined essentially what I was just saying. Trying to find, okay, what's the big picture intellectual foundations before we go into the details. So we have 3 core courses that are all under an umbrella called Business and Society. One of them takes an economist perspective, talks about what I talked about, market failures, government intervention. Then we have another course that takes a political science approach, looks at the kind of institutions out there that are kind of shaping regulation, but also other societal forces that are shaping the business environment. And it's not simply in a spirit of, well, we've got all these people trying to limit what you can do, here's how to outfox them. But it's more in the spirit of how can we form partnerships with all of these different kinds of institutions in society. And then finally, of course, it takes an ethics perspective and just says, what does it mean to be ethical? The idea that business leaders should be ethical is also not controversial. Sometimes it seems like a debate still about whether, as a business leader, you should just do shareholder value maximization, Or, you know, should you also think more ethically? And yet everybody, all of us, is when we go home, we live our lives in a very ethical way. And so it's only natural we would want to do this in the context of our professional lives as well. So that was something we introduced in the curriculum. Now, we then, we're saying, okay, we need to do something big in the sphere. And this is something that Ilya Mihoff, our dean, who's been dean with us for 6 years, he introduced very, very early on, and kind of what he wanted to do as the mission for the school. He wanted to really make it in the forefront and not just have it be some collection of things we do on the side, but make it kind of everywhere as part of what's going on in the school. And we're developing kind of a mission, a project, pitching. We're very fortunate to get supporters who provided substantial funding in order to actually do something bigger, something more transformative. And now, as we decided, what should we do with these new resources? We could have said, well, let's gather all the things we're doing, we'll put it in one place, or we'll create a big institute, a big center. Now it is called, what we created is called the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society. But as we thought about what it should be, we thought we don't want it to be kind of another institute doing its thing off to the side. And I, personally have seen too often, as schools have worked in the sphere, that they will have some center on social responsibility, something on sustainability, but very often they're sitting off in a corner of the campus with a kind of oppositional attitude that's very different from what the sort of more universal attitude that I tried to pitch earlier on in this discussion. And kind of, you're either with us or against us. And as a consequence of being so cloistered, they might have been doing, great work, great research, some great actions, but it wasn't really affecting the rest of the school. It wasn't really transforming things. And we wanted to avoid that. So what we created was something that you can think of as like a strategic center, strategic brain, strategic heart for the school in order to coordinate all the things that we're doing around it. And that's kind of what the Institute is. At first, we called it a virtual institute to try to emphasize that it's not just sitting in a building, but then it sounds like it's something that's only on the web. So we've backed away from that terminology. But the point is, it's a collection of people, ultimately, people and resources who are executing change within the school by partnering with the many other things that are going on within the school, partnering with our students, partnering with the business leaders who are alumni, who are otherwise supporting us, and partnering with other external partners. It's almost like a nexus of partnerships that this institute is coordinating, that's allowing it to execute on this mission and change everything that we're doing. Now, to make that happen wasn't necessarily that easy initially, because as the funding came in, people are like, okay, we gotta go, we gotta do something now. And we have a number of people who've been working in this sphere and have a lot to contribute, and we're kind of ready to get going. And we had to engage, I had engaged in some fairly delicate, what I would call strategic foot dragging, which was, before we start doing a lot and before we get a group of dedicated faculty working gung-ho on this, we needed to get all of the school behind, all the school understanding what they were doing. And this is a little bit of the kind of psychology or sociology of how schools or universities work. If you have some project and a bunch of faculty kind of grab and are very excited and they start working on it, that's great. But it means that everybody else kind of says, okay, I guess somebody's doing that. Okay, it's not my thing. And this is what we were trying to avoid. So with that foot dragging, we managed to get kind of the whole school thinking about what this was going to be, what it was going to look like, try everybody get a sense of that they're participating in it. And the other reason, frankly, to do the foot dragging is that we wanted to get it set up well, rather than getting it simply set up fast. And we wanted to have a very good executive director. We did a thorough recruitment, and we also wanted to also make sure we didn't get pushed into making quick decisions that would lock the executive director into things rather than giving the flexibility for him or her to shape it. So we then recruited Cattell, very fortunately, and as she came in, we had managed to preserve a fair amount of flexibility. We had managed to line up the faculty pretty much behind the project, get a lot of involvement. And then we said, okay, you know, do it for us. Now, it wasn't quite that bad, but here comes in Catel. She's got a PhD. She understands academia, but she's been working outside academia and largely international government organizations. She doesn't know INSEAD. She steps in what is probably our most ambitious and complex kind of transformative project in terms of an academic sort of transformation, and has to execute on it. So, you know, we, of course, you know, those of us involved supported her in this in the onboarding, but then, you know, she took it on to actually execute on this. And actually, I should add, by the way, that we felt it was really important to have, you know, a high-level, powerful administrator who would really run things, who number of faculty would support instead of having being driven by a single faculty member. It's partly just because, you know, faculty aren't necessarily the best administrators, the best executors. But again, it was also this idea that we wanted kind of all the faculty that feel like they were involved and it wasn't just one person's project. So with all that kind of groundwork laid, which was, you know, partly by setting up some foundations, but also making sure we hadn't actually built any walls that she wouldn't be able to work around, we handed it over to Catel. I think this would be a good moment then now to pass over to her and have her tell you a bit of her experiences and challenges and the accomplishments we've had so far.
Thank you, Tim. So this is where I come in. If I pick up on Tim's story, it's like I arrive and it's like, okay, do it now. And I arrive here in Fontainebleau, having had a career with government, NGOs, international organization, only, not knowing INSEAD and not knowing anybody at INSEAD. So I think it was diplomatically said that I was drinking from the hose. At the same time, what was very interesting here, I think, as part of the process, is that I was extremely uncomfortable because I didn't know the culture, I didn't know the crowd. And so in order to try and do something with that project as a start, the approach that I chose to take was to focus on developing the strategy that would basically, in a way that would consult all the stakeholders inside and outside the school, that would consist in my, you know, self-onboarding process. I decided to follow a logic model to develop that 5-year strategy based also on where I was coming from, meaning that we will start with, you know, vision, mission, outcome, outputs, activities, and stakeholder this strategy out with students, faculty members, alumni, and external partners. If we look at where this landed, I'm trying to change the slides, but this is not working here. So where we landed, and that's something you already heard with Tim, is for a vision that was, you know, very much aligned with the foundational aspect of the school and with the vision of the dean that had been constructed in the years to come of you know, a world where businesses create values and social and environmental progress jointly at the same time, concurrently. There was a lot of conversation with faculty member about these ands here. Should it be and, should it be by, should it be with? So I think the conversation with the faculty body of the school showed that there was obviously a spectrum of viewpoints based on research that they were conducting in different departments on whether or not, you know, social and environmental progress should come first or second. So we, in designing the strategy, we basically also opted for a vision that was the one that would work for our group of stakeholders, because our main objective, as Tim was mentioning, was to try and keep that integrated approach throughout everything we would do. In everything we would do, we would try to make sure we never create an us versus them situation. The mission of the Hoffman Institute, looking at that with that vision in mind, is to help transform INSEAD so that INSEAD leads the way in transforming business education in a way that would forge leader and organization that would benefit society and the environment. And at the end of the day, when we drill down through that mission, what is clear is that what we're talking about here is about shifting mindsets. This is what Tim was mentioning before. It's about ensuring that the leaders have a mindset whereby this contribution to societal progress is hardwired in the business model. Okay, so looking at the different aspects and dimensions or pillar of that strategy and keeping that integrated approach in mind, what we landed with is basically a plan that tries to push and infuse these values through everything that the school does. And the approach again here was to say, well, changing mindset happens, of course, in the thought leadership part of the school. It happens in the classroom, but it also happens through every experience that students or participants coming on campus can have. So again, we really were trying to make sure that our strategy would involve every stakeholder groups in the school. So the knowledge production part of the strategy has for outcome the production of new theories, if need be, theoretical framework or research paper on new business models that allow for this integration. And the reason why we call that knowledge and not research was because we also wanted to make sure that under that part of the work, we would try to capture some of the knowledge elements about the students or the participants in the school that may not lead to peer-reviewed publication and yet was important to contribute to this overall mission. The second pillar of our strategy is focusing on learning. And here again, the idea and the outcome that we have the big ambition to trying to reach within the school is to make sure that everybody who comes through INSEAD leaves both aware, maybe also enthused, but very importantly equipped to go and transform organizations so that they deliver this joint outcome that we mentioned before. And that obviously has to do with some changes in the MBA curriculum, some of which preceded the creation of the Institute and that Tim was mentioning before, but also looking at what we do in terms of executive education and what we do also in terms of lifelong learning of our whole alumni community. The third pillar of our strategy is focusing on engagement. And here the idea is to try and create that in and out structure whereby the knowledge and the know-how created in the school doesn't just stay within the confines of the schools, but also is brought to multi-stakeholder conversations outside of the school, and also that conversation informs what's happening inside our school. And the final pillar of our strategy, which I have to say was not obvious for most of the stakeholders that I was speaking to, and that I think was the pillar that I had to make the strongest argument for, was about walking the talk, was about making sure that INSEAD itself as an organization, and even if it's nonprofit, operates according to these values, from the way it's, invests its endowments, to the way it procures its goods and services, to the way it also runs its operations, and look at the global footprint and the social implications of how these operations are run. So this is this is basically the main framework against which we develop the strategy, and that again translates into outputs, activities, 70 of them, and I won't go into the details. And for the first year of life of the Institute, we said, okay, let's try to test case against this strategy, see what comes out of it, and then reevaluate within 1 year to readjust that plan.
This slide that you're showing right here actually illustrates very well how pervasive the project is supposed to be.
Exactly.
Because if you look at the first 3 pillars there, knowledge, learning, and engagement, that would base, this could have just come from a generic, that slide itself, from a generic slide describing some mission statement for a business school. Because basically most business schools, you say, what are you doing It's divided between research, that would be the knowledge. It's divided by, participants coming on campus, we're teaching them, that's the learning. And then it's the kind of engagement with other stakeholders, and that's the engagement. So you can see here that, this was something that was meant to touch everything. When I talked about not having a cloistered institute off to the side, I emphasize, well, it's to make sure everybody feels involved, it's to make sure that we touch everything. But there was also frankly, an operational efficiency aspect of this. You're trying to work on so many things, and how do you actually do it? We wanted something that would allow for optimal centralization and decentralization. So for example, knowledge, a lot of it is best done by faculty kind of just doing individual projects, sometimes bigger projects. We have some centers already doing research. We didn't just fold it in. The Institute has provided various kinds of support and coordination for all these things. And when it was useful, we actually brought teams together. But when that didn't really serve any purpose, we didn't. So I say this just a little bit to help frame, as you talk about the details of how you're executing on this, that the people are, as you come in, of course, we want to talk about the big thing that's going on behind it and so on, but also there's just a lot of kind of operational decisions about how to be as effective as possible in executing on this.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's correct. And to add to that also, if you look at each one of these pillars, you have in particular one stakeholder group that will engage around them. I mean, obviously the faculty will be around, knowledge and learning, but, knowledge, the student body around the learning part, our alumni community around the engagement part, and the staff around the walking the talk. So also in designing the activities, we kept these stakeholders in mind to try and shape and start testing what could work, engaging these different member of our school community. And on this, we'll be very interested to hear your own experience, how you've done it, because we're sharing that experience now with you, knowing that every school is going through similar either thought process or is like much further advanced than we are here. But as tomorrow we're celebrating our 6 months of life, we just thought it was a good time to pause and reflect with you. So another important aspect that was mentioned in terms of team introduction is that we were not starting from scratch. Obviously, there had been decades of work in certain areas that fit right in this interface of business and society on which we will have to build. And so the initial priority that we decided to have for ourselves in terms of investment and support reflected that initial work. So you see here on this slide, these 7 initial priority, they are at a different level of maturity. And some of them are already also materialized. Their work is already materialized around a specific center. For instance, if we take wealth inequality, INSEAD has the Stone Center on Wealth Inequality. So that exists, that functions, and we don't need to just undo it and repackage it within the Institute. Similarly on other issues here. So our approach was to target these issues at the initial priority area while keeping a pipeline of other issues which should come and be covered by the work of the Institute. But operating in an agile way, the idea was not to create yet an extra administrative layer on top of these, but develop specific partnerships based on their needs. In terms of concrete illustrations of what we started to do already, I'm just going to go through, pillar per pillar and give you a little bit of snapshot of what we've done, what we've learned so far, knowing that, again, it's rather initial. So under the knowledge aspect, as I just mentioned, we have the 7 priorities. So there was a natural fit to try and increase the support for knowledge creation under those areas which needed it. In our case, for instance, we invested quite a lot so far on sustainability, on humanitarian operations, just because at the moment where we took on the mandate, these were areas where there was a lot of research in the pipeline that we could support. In addition to that, what we did is that we created, so that was pretty much like more targeted funding support to these areas. In addition, we created a business and society fund that had a much broader scope in terms of what it could cover, i.e. everything, that we embedded within the R&D committee of the school that had specific criteria for allocation to research projects that could come from every faculty member, whether they would be working on these 7 areas or not. And so the idea of complementing direct funding with that more generic fund, again, was to, and with this view of integration, was to try and broaden the type of incentive and the scope of what we are trying to do, number one. And number two, what we were trying to do was to use the existing governance structure of the school. As Tim mentioned, before I joined, there had been a deliberate effort to try and keep the governance not completely sealed so that we could, co-create it. And one of the decisions that we made while also building the strategy was to make sure we wouldn't go too fast with setting the governance. And what we've decided to do is to take a full year of, testing and evaluating before we revisit this and use the existing structure of the school as much as possible. Here also is an illustration of the initiative, conference that we ran on the topic, things that you are also probably more familiar with in terms of the direct product for academic exchanges.
I should emphasize the idea, for example, for allocating research funds to our existing research and development committee, existing governance structure, wasn't just something, oh, let's do this on an interim basis until we have time to set something else up, but rather it's experimenting with that this may well be the best way to do things. Mm-hmm. And again, it's this idea of, big thing, but there's a lot of just operational decisions to make. And we felt it'd be more efficient, and also, but people would find it more transparent to use the same kind of structure, the same people who are already evaluating the quality of research projects to also evaluate research projects that would be, that the funds would be directed to, instead of having a completely separate committee, essentially, duplicating effort in some way, but are we sure they're using the same kind of quality standards and so on? Yeah. And also we're therefore sure that also that the committee that's allocating the funds isn't in a sense being or viewed as taken over by insiders. Okay, so we have
so there is that. I think there is a quality control, but there is also that idea that the more structure we set that are specific to the institute, the less we are pushing the integrated approach. Yeah. So I think it's all these elements that led us to that. That's correct. So the illustration about, what we did with the second pillar, and also keeping these principles in mind. Tim mentioned that before the institute, because that was already a strong push in the school, before the institute came, there had already been a whole MBA curriculum revamp, and that had integrated some core courses in the curriculum on business and society. So our approach here was not to try and go frontal to reopen that that process, which, as all of you know, takes a lot of time and is complicated because it involves so many different stakeholders, but was more to look at the curriculum itself and have conversation with some of the faculty members, or have them come to us, as a matter of fact, and suggest some way of tweaking certain things in some courses, so that these values and this approach would be reflected. So here, the whole approach basically was not in terms of trying to completely revamp the toolbox. As Tim said, there are a lot of these tools in the toolbox that are still extremely important and relevant when we're talking about aligning business with society, but it's about how having students and participants be exposed to different ways of applying that toolbox because of a change in case, because of a change of conversation, so that we would try and contribute to this change of mindset that we were talking about. So let me start with that, and then I'll go back to the previous slide. So here are pictures, and it's an illustration of core courses on strategy that we have early on in the MBA curriculum, which, you know, typically when we do our review at what falls under business and society may not tick the box right away. The teacher, Professor Itai Stern, who's leading part of it with other colleagues, was not also the people who would have said, oh, you should work with him on this particular topic because that's what he's been publishing on his whole life. But what was extremely interesting here is that at the end, as an evaluation of the strategy class, is what we call the Master Strategies Day, which is an innovation that was brought in the curriculum years back, whereby for one day, the 500 cohort of students on the 2 campuses work on a live case and try to develop strategic solution for a particular challenge that this company is experiencing. And so the suggestion of the professor leading Master Strategies Day was to say, we can bring a different kind of business as a live case so that students will spend that whole day applying these tools differently. And that's basically what was kickstarted, and that what we supported, which was to bring a different case in that particular exercise to have a student apply and struggle with a toolbox differently. We started in the school with Unjani, based in South Africa, working to provide increased access to healthcare in the country. It's a network of social entrepreneurs trying to provide access, which is affordable, to a large portion of the population. And so during that day of the Master Strategies Day, the CEO of the company is on campus. We have mentors and coaches from Bain supporting all the students in group of 5s. And then it's a competitive system to try and develop strategy model. So we have stories on that on our website. I won't go into the details. What I wanted to point here is that course existed. It was there. It wasn't changed. What changed was the case. And then a conversation between faculty members also to try and bring that same more complex case in a very different setting, because, you know, of being in an emerging market than the one that students were typically used to deal with, try to bring that case in other core classes at the beginning of the curriculum, to then support the development of a business and society practicum, where some of the students, small cohort of the students, will actually go in South Africa, work with the organization to try and implement some of these solutions. So these are things that we worked with this professor, we supported financially as the Institute.
I think it's a good example of illustrating, you know, how the Institute ends up making a difference, because this was very bottom up. As you said, it was a professor in a course that has no particular relationship to the general topic, had an idea, and what would have happened without the Institute is he would have said, it's an ambitious idea, required resources, people, help, coordination. He would have said, I've got this idea, I want to do this. And yet, you know, there would be no structure, nothing in the existing structure to provide enough support for that. Would have eventually kind of given up and it wouldn't have gone anywhere. Instead, Cattell could help figure out, okay, within our team, we've got people who have the expertise to help you with the case writing. We have a little bit of funding to support the part that wouldn't have normally be supported by the R&D committee. And we can help with the coordination of the events. And so this bottom-up idea ended up flourishing instead of it just kind of dying because there was no particular structure for supporting it.
So what we're working on now, once that's been, what is being tested, is to try and support these professors through that particular exercise in institutionalizing that pilot. Quickly, we also, in parallel, at the school level, tested new electives. So here is a picture from the Singapore campus on the Sustainable Development Goals Bootcamp, which is basically a weekend where our MBA students design social or impact ventures that are connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then at the end of the weekend, same thing, there's a competition, they present it to a jury of either real or pretend corporate leaders to whom they're trying to sell their ventures. So just to show you this. But I think the main illustration here is to say that our approach to this mandate is not to make sure that INSEAD produces more social entrepreneurs, is to, and therefore not to make sure that everything goes in one direction or mainly support one elective on social entrepreneurship. All this is great. It's really to make sure that irrespective of the industry and the job that the participants coming on campus take, they are equipped and they are aware of that, of the importance of delivering societal progress. I need to hurry a little bit so we have time for a chat. So quickly on the external engagement, here a lot of our approach has been to scan what was the potential to amplify our contribution outside of the school and try to partner in a way that would provide that great return on investment. And of course here working with our alumni was a no-brainer, not least because it's ED, they're still extremely connected to the school, but also because they are global. They are in pretty much every country, so the impact at scale globally that we can have here is important. And I have to say very modestly that when I took on that job, that dimension of the possible impact of what we could do in the school, I didn't really understand and measure, and that's something that I keep on being surprised with. So very concretely, what that meant is that we became a partner, for instance, of the Change Now Summit for Change, one of the largest impact summit in the world. What we did there and what we continue to do now as they also scale and develop is to try and bring some of the latest thinking in the research produced as INSEAD in this conversation, and also convene and bring together different stakeholders to discuss about very topical issues. This summit was created by 2 alumni from INSEAD. Another illustration was our co-sponsoring the Sustainable Development Goals tent at the World Economic Forum. So for those of you who know that landscape, the World Food Program tent had been there for nearly a decade to try and discuss about food issues at the World Economic Forum. This year, the idea of a number of investors was to turn that tent into a tent dedicated to conversation around responsible leadership under this umbrella of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so we also saw that as an opportunity for amplifying our impact, and also bringing our alumni, corporates, governments and civil society together to look at specific societal issues. And I won't go into the details of this, but basically we were one of the major co-sponsors of that tent, and we led a number of events and conversation under that, which were not just one-offs, but we are now pulling through our external engagement strategy. A quick illustrations also about this time bringing the outside thinking in. We just recently launched a Sustainable Development Goals speaker series in the school for trying to raise awareness and show very concretely at the CEO level what it means to deliver societal progress as a leader of an organization, and how that contributes to the goals that the international community has defined for itself. Very quickly, under the walk the talk, one activity that we have started to test and develop is to have professors researching and teaching on the issues that falls under our 7 priorities come and run sessions with staff. Very often staff working, as you will also know and have experienced, around all the programs in the schools are not that involved with the content. And here the idea again was, if we are to try to bring an integrated approach to our work, and if we want to have everybody equipped to talk about these issues, we need to make sure that the staff is also equipped to do so. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that. There are plenty of other examples we could share, but we, just thought we would jump in. We would be a little bit uncomfortable because it's quite funny to be here and not seeing anybody, and then engage in a conversation with you now, but also after this seminar, so that we can share experience and bring our forces together for greater impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a few minutes to do a Q&A. I'm just going through the questions here. Okay, we've got a few. So apart from working with faculty, have you faced any resistance from staff or senior management or the board? Change can be hard.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that on. Again, for us, there was some legwork that had been done, as Tim was mentioning, in terms of that overall buy-in. So and that was done in a number of ways, including through a retreat with all faculty members and senior management of the school around these issues to try and collect their inputs, a positive and constructive and in different ways, and ensuring that these inputs served as a base for the development of the strategy. So that's just an illustration of how we also made sure that there was that buy-in. In general, the senior management of the school has been very behind the project at the school level. Similarly, as with our board, and we also provide regular updates to both. So and from the student body, we also did a survey with a 2 cohorts of students that were on campus, 1,000 of them last year. And we also clearly see, as most of the research is showing already, that there is an increased demand and ask from students to have more conversation around this topic. And in that sense, they were telling us that we needed to do more. So I think that these numbers also, are helpful in terms of showing that the customer, in a way, also ask for this. From a staff point of view, I was surprised by the enthusiasm around the topic, actually. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, when I asked Catel the question about staff, because I wasn't quite, I had a little bit lost touch of how they're supporting it. And she said, well, actually, quite supportive. Some people wondering, what are we really doing? It's hard to communicate what you're doing. And particularly this way of operating that I described. It's hard to point to the whole big collection of kind of things that happened that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So in a project like this, you can have pushback from people who maybe don't share the ideal, and they're cynical in the sense, I don't think we should be going there. But you have people who are quite passionate about it and are worried that, oh, it's a lot of noise that the school is making, but in the end, we're not going to really do that much. Okay. Now I can tell you, we are doing a lot, but communicating that is a constant challenge to make sure that people appreciate it and see it happening.
I think it's communicating, and also going down to the level of what does that mean for me? What does that mean for me in my day job? And we still have a lot of work to do around that. That's what we're trying to do with this brown bag with faculty. But we have some work to do there.
Great. Next question. Do you work with the UN directly, or do you plan to?
So we haven't yet directly, but we planned to. I think from me coming from that world, because my previous jobs were directly with the UN, I was also trying to be very honest, even though we don't see anybody. I think it was important to really start from the conversation in the school before building partnerships outside. to really evaluate it, where we are, what was the interest, what was the starting point before going outside. But yeah, we plan to. We are, you know, a member of the PRME system, the UN Compact, etc. So these things, as in most schools, are here. But in terms of direct partnership, that's in the plans.
What are your recommendations for improving alumni engagement? Any winning strategies?
Alors, so again, all this for me, I can still say is quite new. So I'm sharing a very candid view here. And it depends what you mean by engagement. Maybe the person who put the question may want to be more specific.
Let me take a first stab at this and then have you react with the reality.
I just want to know if it means fundraising or something else.
Right. So, you know, engagement can mean, you know, support and enthusiasm, and then support can mean financially, but it also can mean in people. Now, the one thing that I think I was personally surprised at was that the alumni are super excited about this. Okay. And in fact, the alumni like to be engaged. So the problem of, in a sense, of alumni engagement isn't so much their enthusiasm for it, it's managing that engagement in a productive way. And I would say at our school, we've kind of upped our game in doing that in general. And one of the important roles of the Institute is to try to, you know, harness that energy around this topic. And if anything, one of the challenges that Catel had as she was new on the ground wasn't sort of a lack of people offering to help. It's only people offering to help, but she didn't, you know, at a very early stage for her, she wasn't quite sure how to manage all this. Okay, so in that sense, the enthusiasm is there, and then the engagement has been, you know, a kind of a process of how do we manage that in a really productive way and in a way in which the alumni feel like their time and money is being used well and in an appreciative way.
Yeah, and yeah, so I think on this, I personally do not have an answer, and that's something that we, you know, I think collectively should work on. It's not it's more about managing engagements for the greatest impact and what's the strategy behind that. There is a huge uptake, as Tim said, in a lot of the national associations of alumni of INSEAD. There are conversations around business and society that happen in a very organic way. I think it's more what we have to figure out is like, what's our role in the school in trying to make that more than the sum of the parts. But the engagement is here, the action is already here, and we also ran an impact survey that was financed by one of our alumni, Dirk Luton, that shows already the impact of our community. So I think that telling these stories and finding ways of engaging strategically is the right way to go.
So he did, this is from Rashmi Jain, he did clarify, he means engagement meaning involvement in student careers, preparation, and curriculum activities, not so much funding.
Exactly, because of course, yes. So we working with the same thing with this spirit of integration. We're working with the directorship of alumni engagement in the school, which is a great ally and a partners for us here to try and start systematizing structuring this so that we can develop that strategy better. For instance, in the way that alumni define their profile, we now mapping the extent to which they have expertise or direct actions around our 7 strategies, so that then through the system of recording the alumni, we can already tap into the community directly without having to go in an ad hoc or organic way. In all the reunions and the forums that are organized for our alumni, these topics are now, if not the core topic, completely embedded in all of them, as well as in the newsletter. I just want to mention that we have a huge campaign on, so the Force for Good campaign, which is pushed in the coming 5 years around the same theme. So we're working very closely to make sure that we optimize that engagement. But again, one step at a time.
As a specific examples of alumni engagement in our on-campus MBA program, we have a lot of alumni who are working in this sphere already, and our participants, who are the ones who are most interested in such, are looking for knowledge sharing or mentors. And one of the roles of the Institute is actually to connect these people. Yeah. One of the problems, again, we know these alumni are out there. We know these students are there. Students before, they wouldn't quite be sure who to ask, how do they get connected? And this is exactly one of the roles of the Institute, to do those kinds of connections. And then another, quite tangible example, Change Now. Is that an example of alumni engagement MBA program? Yeah, it is. I mean, it connects to many things, but how did our partnership with there get started? The two people who are running that are INSEAD alumni, and they sort of sent an email, not sure who to contact, to somebody saying, hey, we want to do something with the school. We're not sure what to do. Sometimes that kind of query just gets lost somewhere. We were able to take it and say, yeah, that would be really interesting. So they're alumni, that's the sense in which they engaged, but then one of the things that we wanted to achieve and that they wanted to achieve was to have our own MBA students participating in the summit itself. Yep. And so we helped coordinate that participation, which otherwise would have been difficult for our students or difficult for Change Now to achieve.
But all that is mostly more ad hoc now, and we need to do it strategically. That remains to be done.
I think we have time for one more question. Let me pick a good one here. Okay, congratulations on great initial progress with the transformation. Recognizing how hard it has been, even in a school that has business and society in its DNA, how does INSEAD and all of us help lead the way in transforming business education worldwide? What, for example, needs to happen to make this possible?
Well, I think, the sponsor of this event today is called the Global Business School Network. I think we need to, even again, as I started to say, let me reiterate, it's a little bit uncomfortable because, we're only 6 months old and we don't see you. I think we need to share more about what we're trying to do. I think we need to be very honest about, some of the complexities. And I think we should really, really help each other learn from success stories. Because I mean, some of the issues that we are struggling with are very common and generic. So I think that joining forces can really, really make a difference. Again, there was a survey done, an analysis done by Bridgespan last year, looking at social impact of sustainability centers in all business schools. And you can see that every business school has such a center, an initiative or something. So there is, there is a whole community of us, and there are networks, several networks of us. And I think leveraging the power of these networks, I think in my view, is the way to go. And we can do that digitally.
And so, as Katzel said, that's in a sense exactly what the GBSN is for.
Right.
The conference in Lisbon in November has as a big theme thinking about business education and society. So I'll be there in the hope of learning, but also sharing.
Opening our academic conference so that they are really co-organized with other schools, making sure that schools come together to share how to redesign curriculum or change things in curriculum or develop new electives, etc.
Okay, one more question. Sorry, there's a few coming in. Do you have support from the government? And do you think it's important to scale similar initiatives?
Support from the government.
Moral support, we hope, but financial, not specifically at the moment.
Well, the school operates, I mean, it's an independent school, INSEAD. It's, I mean, it's not like, I mean, I'm just trying to understand where the question is coming from, where this is something that some school may have to seek in order to be empowered, or, I mean, so I don't really, so, but again, I think that the engagement outside of the school in the public conversation with all stakeholders around this topic is essential. Because these are the topics of our time, what we're talking about, from you know, these frictions between business and society, ranging from climate change to wealth inequalities, are the topic of our times. And I think we all have a responsibility to engage in conversation with different stakeholders that try and provide solutions. So we should seek support from all these stakeholders, I would argue. Personal view, I'm not speaking on behalf of the school.
I've probably been a little bit dismissive of the support we have received from the government because as a private school, we are largely privately funded, but we receive, frankly, some financial support from France, from Singapore, and from the Abu Dhabi governments. And some of this has been quite targeted quite specifically to the themes here. So in Singapore, there's an Emerging Markets Institute, which is often addressing these topics with significant seed funding from the Singaporean government. In Abu Dhabi, for example, we had a conference on the role of entrepreneurship and its possible role in reducing youth unemployment in the Middle East and North Africa that received some of its funding from the Abu Dhabi government. So we do have some, partnerships and support there.
Great, thank you. So we are out of time. Thank you so much, Tim and Catel.
Thank you.
Just so everyone knows, you will receive the PowerPoint presentation as well as the recorded webinar and a Q&A report. So you will see all of the questions and their answers typed out into a Word document within a few days. Thank you everyone for logging in today, and check out the GBSN website to see more upcoming cross-border coffee break webinars. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Catel.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.